afternoon, parents, children, and teachers. I say teachers last, but actually teachers last the longest because each and every one of us is a teacher, and the memory of what your teachers teach you is forever. So welcome to the Study School Stay Connected and Learn series. Every Saturday at 12:30, we get together with some fabulous guests. We've been really fortunate in the past. We've talked about what should be on your plates, technology, how much is too much, and of course, we had how to make your child creative. Today, there's a bit of Shakespeare in there. It's called To Read or Not to Read? That is the question. And to answer that question, we have absolutely brilliant speakers. We have Vinita Dwaranangya, who is the editor of the Times of India. She writes that amazing weekly column called Ozone on relationships and contemporary living. She has been the person who put forth the Times of Literature Festival, and her spirit is such she can never be sort of complacent. So she this year started the Author Awards to promote women's writing, and she and our other speaker are connected through that, and so am I, because Bulbul Sharma was the chairperson of the children's book section jury, and I happen to be a contributor to that as well. So Vinita, we are absolutely delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here with you.
The movement that you've started through Write India to create the next generation of writers is stupendous. Ladies and gentlemen, children, we have with us Bulbul Sharma, and we are really lucky to have her here with us because she's not really with us, and being virtual, we can go beyond. She is 6,000 feet above sea level, up on a mountain, in a place where I would love to be, because behind her window she showed us is the most delightful view. And being the person she is, a painter and an author, I think it's not surprising that that's her oxygen. So she's in a place with lots of pure oxygen, and it's not surprising that she's writing another book. And I think her journey began with her sainted aunts who took her traveling through the world. And once you are a traveler, even in COVIDian times, nothing can hold you back. So Bulbul Sharma and Vinita, welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here with you.
Yes. So I'm going to start with you, Vinita, because when people talk about reading, they think of, and especially you being from a newspaper, it seems like another genre, especially in today's day and age where everything is quick and instant, and reading may have been something that many in this generation think could take a backseat, and yet your life revolves around that. So I mean, from a perspective of reading is not just knowledge, it's unleashing of an imagination, because suddenly you don't have an image, you have to make that image. So your thoughts on the importance of reading, especially with regard to children.
Hello, and thank you for having me here. It's wonderful to be here with you, and particularly the topic that you selected, Shivani, to read or not to read. I was thinking with some amusement that had it not been for reading and writing, we wouldn't even have got this topic, because to write, to be or not to be, is from Hamlet, is from Shakespeare's Hamlet. And that itself gives the title to this wonderful conversation that I'm really looking forward to. Reading to me has been an intrinsic part of my very existence. I mean, my first memories of childhood are being read out stories to and listening to stories. And, reading, a large part of reading is reading stories. And as stories, I don't just mean fictional stories. I feel everything that is conveyed to us is conveyed through a story. We all talk to each other. We tell each other so many stories every day without even realizing that we are narrating stories. When you talk to somebody about something that happened in your neighborhood, or you're narrating an incident or even a crime, we all are narrating it to each other as a story. So it's the exchange of these stories that make up such a big part of our life. And right from the beginning, from childhood, I think everything that is taught to us is through stories. And initially, when we are not even able to read, it is our parents or grandparents who have probably read much earlier or heard these stories. And all our values, all our understanding of our culture, everything is passed on to us through words, through those stories. And writing is just the stringing together of those words. putting together of those stories, which are such an essential part of our lives.
Well, Vanita, you started the Right India movement. And what makes you think, or what is that confidence with which anybody can be a writer? How much do you need the skill of language, the skill of form? What is this thought behind anybody could do it?
Yes, I do think that anybody can be, and that is constantly the refrain of Write India. We say that Write India is a contest of short story writing. It is definitely a contest of self expression, because I believe that writing is a great way of expressing your deepest emotions, of even, resolving your conflicts. Right from childhood, whenever I was upset about something, I would put it all down in a personal diary. In fact, we were encouraged by my dad to have personal diaries and write down everything. And I think that was the starting of my writing career, my entire lifetime of dedication to writing. So when you are upset, when you're angry, and I actually tell people that even when you're very, very upset with your spouse and you want to convey something, a very good way of conveying it is to write it down, because when you speak you don't really have that control over your emotions. So if all of us have these expressions, these emotions, and we want to express them, we can write it out definitely. And where
So
language is concerned, language is something that you learn over the years and with practice, with reading. So that's where the importance of reading comes in.
you've taken the words out of my mouth. I was going to ask you, when does Right India stop and Read India begin?
Mm.
Write India and Read India are definitely a part of each other. You can never write unless you read. And whatever you write is going to be read by others. You write only to be read by others. There's not much fun in writing if nobody reads what you've written. You're writing as a form of expression, and that expression you would want to share with people widely. And it is only like, even in my column Ozone, when I write it out, and it's like, it's I've just put myself out there and sent off the column to the paper. It gets printed, and when people read it and they can relate to me through that writing, and they tell me that yes, you took the words out of my mouth, like you just said, that is when the great satisfaction comes in. So they are intrinsically related to
Well,
each other.
these are two philosophies. One is a newspaper editor who writes for her readers. And I'm assuming that there's another parallel philosophy there, Bulbul, because you are an artist. And my understanding of an artist like you, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be that you would first paint for yourself. It would be your canvas. And the eyeballs are something that comes on like a embellishment later. Is that correct?
Uh, well, first of all, hello, good to be here. And yeah, writing, because I'm a painter and a writer, both I think go together. It's like, what should I say? Uh, they enhance each other. And a lot of writers are painters, though they might not paint professionally, but they do. And coming back to children's writing, children love doing them. They love matching words to images, and
Yes.
it comes very easily to them. And like Vinita was saying, it's kind of a therapy. If they can't express something through an image, then they'll write a few words. If you see a child's drawing, especially very young children, they'll always scribble a few lines to make sure that you've got the message, what they're trying to express. So, I mean, it's both are really wonderful, and it's wonderful to have a gift from God that you can write and paint.
So in your case, what happened first? Was it the painter that came along and the writer sprouted out of that? Or as you're saying, with children, they paint and they write, and for you too, that journey was side by side?
Well, I used to paint, I mean, from a very young age, and I always painted, and my parents always encouraged me. And writing came much later. Actually, writing just came by accident because I was doing some drawings for a newspaper, for Statesman. There was a newspaper called Statesman, and it was just drawing charcoal drawings of people who made a living working on the street. So, and they tell me incredible stories about their lives. So I told my editor, I said, look at these wonderful stories. Why don't you send a reporter to write? And they said, we can't spare any reporter for such a thing. So why don't you? You're wasting time just drawing them. So why don't you do that? So I started writing, and that's sheer accident that I started writing. And then I started writing actually for Times of India also, on nature. And my writing was totally organic and just grew out of, I don't know what.
And the painting?
Painting, I still continue. I don't paint that much professionally, but I write much more. I write all the
No, when you were saying
time.
the writing is organic, was the painting thought out, or is that organic growth just the path
Well,
that you've
yeah,
had?
painting too, just because, like I said earlier, they go together. When you're writing and you come to a certain point where you sort of, thoughts are not flowing that easily, I can always go back to writing. I go back to sketching something, and that immediately opens up all kinds of things in your head. I don't know what it is.
You know, Bulbul, when you walk into the study school, right now that doesn't happen. We have a virtual learning program where children come online because of these COVIDian times. But as soon as you walk into the school in east of Kailash, the first thing you see is this beautiful splash of colors, a woman with a lovely flower on her hair. And underneath, there's a signature that says Bulbul Sharma.
That was a long time ago. Yeah, it was wonderful. I really enjoyed that. But now I try to combine when I, write a lot for children now. Like you said, I'm doing these fantasy tales, and I'm doing the illustrations for it. But when I do workshops with children, either in creative writing or in art, I try to combine both, because it's really therapy. Like Vinita said, the children, especially children who are disturbed or been through some kind of traumatic experience, when they write, they say many more things that they wouldn't tell you or their
Yes.
parents or their teacher. So writing it's so important. It's not just for fun. I think it's a really important thing for a child, for their growth, for their development, and it
You
just
know,
for their well-being.
yes, absolutely. Vinita, you had invited me to read to the children at the Times Literature Festival, and I took Trishla Jain's book, which was Thankful for Thankful, and I found it so amazing because it had such a spiritual underline, and I read it to the children at the study school on our annual day, and it was so much fun because we made this train, and the children were running around, and so reading made quite physically dynamic, and images brought out vibrantly, and not just as the illustrations but as popping uh, pills for your imagination to be unleashed. I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, one thing is this very eminent editor of the Times of India and this lady who has set up so many movements to promote reading and writing, but in your own home, what was your journey with your children? How did you weave in the reading and writing aspect?
I think a lot of us teach by example, even without realizing that's what we are doing. Uh, and I was always someone right from childhood, like I said, who was deep into reading. In fact, to the extent that I think I had a father who used to chase me with books all the time. So he would find me sitting somewhere, and he would just pop up there with 2, 3 books in his hands and say, "Nothing to do. Here are these books." And what was very interesting was he wouldn't just hand over the books. He would tell me little stories behind the books and try to arouse my curiosity. And once that was done, and then he would hand over the book and say, "Find out the rest in the book." So I would be forced to read that. So I think when you see your parents reading, when you hear stories from them, you grow up as someone who thinks that that's part of life. Reading is a part of life, and it's something that you need to do. The medium changes, of course. I think I read more physical books and still do like reading more physical books, and the children take more to Kindle and online versions of books. That's different. But the fascination for the written word and the fascination for reading, and even more so for writing, I do stress a lot on writing, because I feel that in this world there are so many people who are stressed out, so many people who are lonely, so many people who don't have a means of expressing their deeper emotions. And this is one way of allowing an outpour of your emotions, and so being able to deal with your traumas, whatever they may be. Reading also takes you into another world. And very often, again, I say that, one, you will never be lonely if you have books at home to read, and you will never be stressed, because an easy way out is to pick up a book and get lost in another world, and just get lost, totally lost in it, and you've just forgotten all your traumas and your stress and all, and you're happy. So
Yes.
even in childhood, I think it's very important, that typical image which we all have of our grandmothers or our mothers tucking us in bed and narrating stories to us. And that's how we pass on even, the moral lessons that we want to teach our children, the values that we want to impart to them. That's something that I was very particular about with my children.
So what you've just said was actually my playing a little bit of devil's advocate, because all of us get tempted into the meal before the TV. Last time we had Rajiv saying no meals before the TV, even though I'm a technology person, no phones
Yeah.
at the table. So similarly, no tucking in children with a movie on the screen, instead a book.
Yeah.
Any tools that you would like to share, Bulbul, to help with that reading habit?
Well, I think mainly if the children, see their parents reading, like Vinita said, if you grow up seeing your parents reading and their books in the house, you don't really have to ask a child; he'll automatically pick up. And a lot of children I've seen don't, like start reading. They won't read when they're 4 or 5, and the parents get very anxious. My child is not reading. So and so's child is already read entire Harry Potter series, and don't make those comparisons, because if a child gets self-conscious and he feels that, oh, this is something I have to do, it becomes like some school work or something like an exam. So if you just leave the books, read to them when they're younger, they will start reading, and once they discover the joy of you know books, that's it.
So I have a question from Gehna, who's Genevieve's mum, and she says, "What is the way forward for books? Are graphic novels the future?" So, Bulbul, I'd like to ask you first, since illustrations seem to be your way, and then Vinita, your inputs, because when it comes to the future of this sphere, I think you are very active in that.
I think graphic novels are brilliant. I just love them, especially I've noticed with some children I've worked with, is that if they might get, they don't enjoy books which have no illustrations at all, even, but graphic novel immediately grab their attention, and it's a good way, it's a good bridge, and they'll, go on to reading other books. They might just go back to reading the same book in another format, but graphic novels are brilliant.
So, which graphic novel would you recommend, and for what age group?
Well, what the ones I like are the ones that take classic stories. Like I read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde recently in graphic novel, and that was, but it depends on the age, the child's age.
For really tiny children,
Tiny,
perhaps you want to read to your child and show the imagery, what would you recommend? Say 3, 2, 3, 4, 5.
then picture books. I mean, Indian, children's publishing is now so good, and there's so many. When my children were growing up, we just had to buy imported books all the time, which were, frightfully expensive. But now there are really good books coming out. So any picture books, initially till the age of about 7, 6, 7, they love pictures. And, the text can be minimum, but if the picture catches their imagination, then you could, read them the whole story.
Yes, Vinita, what the future? Graphic
Yeah,
novels?
no, I think it has to be and should always be a mix of plain reading and graphic novels. Graphic novels, perhaps to catch the imagination of those who are not really into reading, whether they are very young children or they're adolescents. But beyond that, I really think that one should be reading, and not just graphic novels. But having said that, I mean, all my first ever stories that I heard about are epics and or mythology. Everything is from Amar Chitra Katha. When we were children, being exposed to Amar Chitra Katha, which had all those stories about Savitri, Satyavan, about the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, all the short stories, the backstories. One knows them all so well because of Amar Chitra Katha at that point. So it fascinates you. So I would say that so long as children are reading, it doesn't really matter what they read. You see a lot of parents leading a child into a bookshop and then demanding certain books and handing it over to the child and telling the child, this is what you have to read. I am more a believer of putting many books in front of a child and allowing him or her to choose what they want to really read. What is important is reading, not what they are reading initially. And once they get hooked, they form their own interests and they decide what they want to read. You can't force anybody to read what you want them to read.
You mentioned the mythological books, and when it comes to that, I think one of the most iconic books that has been put forth has been put together by Bulbul, that is on the Ramayana. Bulbul,
Yes.
that is something that is even part of the curriculum, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah.
that journey, was it just a reflection of wanting to put things in perspective in modern light? How did you get down to writing the children's book on the Ramayana?
Well, actually, I was commissioned by Penguin to write that book. And because at that time there wasn't a children's Ramayana, now there are plenty. Something which is simple. And surprisingly, Shivani, a lot of adults have read that Ramayana. You know, people who wanted a sort of, especially people who not that familiar with, most Indians are, but people who live abroad and have grown up. So that was how it started. And the Book of Demons, which your friend has, came out of that. It's like a byproduct, because when I read, I had to read about 5 or 6 Ramayans to, write this one. I
Yes.
saw there were these amazing demons who were so beautiful, some of them. So I decided that, we should write about them.
So every time I used to tease my children, and if they weren't listening to me, my favorite thing to do was to tell them, well, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to change your name to Hidimba.
Oh, I love it. Remember, wonderful lady. Yeah.
I just thought that, sometimes when there's a journey into a past that we know as a certain past, and that journey is peppered with a little bit more information, like through your books, then that journey becomes so colorful. Personally, for me, the biggest wonder and joy of reading is when you as a family can refer to a character, a Hidimba, or any character from any book, and then the whole family, it's like one big binding factor that brings you together, because you know exactly what it is.
Right.
And one of the most beautiful things that we do at our dining table, when on the occasions that my husband is relaxed, I ask him to recite poetry,
Oh.
because I think that's something, a
Mm.
lot of people miss out on. We are focused so much on reading that the enjoyment of taking those words and making them your own. As soon as the lockdown started, the one thing I did is do Rudyard Kipling's poem, if you can keep your head on your
Yeah,
shoulders while all about you
yeah,
are losing
yeah.
theirs. And that gave me the strength to go through lockdown in a frame of mind which was, I won't say not judgmental, but so much less demanding and less, sort of defining of what I expected of other people. So the other great inspiration that I find is खूब लड़ी मर्दानी वो तो झांसी वाली रानी. So Vinita, coming to that woman power, you've always believed in it. And what is your feeling when it comes to reading? How important is it to inculcate in a reading curriculum books that widen your perspective, whether it's removal of prejudices or it is appreciation of other genders?
Before coming to that, I want to go back to your husband reciting poetry at the dining table, and I
Yeah,
find
I
that
like
quite,
that.
yeah, I find that very fascinating, and it's a lovely way to introduce self-expression and particularly poetic expression to your family, to your children. We all were poets as children. I'm sure all of us have written some poetry somewhere or the other and hidden it away. That's not something we've shared with many people. And that's also a genre that I think at our literature festivals also we have kind of ignored, not really encouraged so much. But I think we should. And I believe that in this period of lockdown, this is really absolutely the ideal time to get our children started on reading and writing, and to encourage them to write short poetry, encourage them to write short stories, because there is time, and also the emotional turmoil is such, getting used to a new pattern of life, the end of a certain way of life and the starting of another. I think this is the ideal time for everybody to explore the writer and the poet in themselves. Coming back to your question, Shivani, definitely the curriculum has to have all aspects of history, all aspects of all represent all genders, represent all sides of every question. Unfortunately, we hear that a lot of that is not being done, and historical narratives and all also are being are biased today when we are teaching them to our children. So when that is so, and if we can do nothing about that, I think a better way is to introduce them to literature and to introduce them to books, where we can make up for the lack of these aspects in the curriculum, and encourage children to read widely, discuss, and have these little reading groups, the readers groups that all cities have nowadays. That is so encouraging and such a welcome feature, really, that people get together and they talk about books, they read a particular book and discuss it.
Yes.
So we must encourage children to do more of that as well. And maybe they can use these kind of Zoom conferences to do stuff like that.
That's an excellent idea. Speaking about curriculum, there's a question here, which is from Shalini. She is the mother of a former student of the study school, Arman. He is now 8 years old, and she wants to know, why has the quality of the chapters and text included in school books deteriorated, that too to such unimaginable lows?
Shall I answer that?
Yes, please.
Well, because what happens is, I think the textbooks are all from NCRT, and I think everybody can't produce their own textbook. I don't think that's allowed by the government. So they have to have this kind of strange, sometimes, what should I say, even in the Hindi, if you read the Hindi books, they're so tough. And there's nothing that teaches a child the joy of Hindi literature or English literature. And some of them are really, like, I read my granddaughter's class 12 textbook. They were so depressing, the poems, all about death and destruction and war. So I really don't know who selects them. And I agree with your, guess what she's saying.
Shalini, yes.
They should include some creative people and to sit down and write something positive, get the children to read something positive.
I think also perhaps the way of teaching has become so top down, as opposed to maybe a collaborative system. Even though our children are 2, 3, 4, 5, at the school when it was Diwali, I did the Ramayana with the children, and I made them do Ringa Ringa Roses in different groups of families, So if it was Dashrath and one wife and that child, then they were in one Ringa Roses, and then Dashrath moved to the next one. And it was fun. So I mean, if the curriculum could include drama, which had to have a drama teacher, and frankly, an English teacher can be a drama teacher, but somebody who makes the children actually perform what they're doing, I think perhaps there is not enough focus on bringing alive the texts.
Right.
What do you have to say about that, Vinita?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Our education system is so heavily based on learning by rote and just focused on exams, that the fun of learning and teaching has actually never been there in our schools and colleges. In fact, students who are passionate about a subject, by the time they reach college, they go off that subject. And I've had it happening with my son, because most of the time the teachers won't be coming in, the professors won't be coming in, and half the time they're not really helping you, helping arouse your passion in the subject. And that is really sad. And going back to what you did with Trishla's book at the Literature Festival, making it so much fun for the children, and children are bound to remember that. When you tell somebody, facts and figures are not likely to stay stuck in our brains. The only way to stick them there is to tell them through stories. And people are able to relate to other people. They're able to relate to characters. So stories are a very important way of helping us learn. So when you're just telling somebody, learn the facts and figures, come and sit for the exam and spew them out, it doesn't really help you, because after the exam you'll have forgotten it. But when the same things have been told to you in an interesting manner, through, like you said, drama, or through the narration of stories, people are likely to remember that for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And through the selection of text, because the text that we had was really focusing on, in Trishla's book, on saying thank you. And every parent tells their child, you must say thank you. Just one second. We seem to have someone on our video. Okay. So when we really look at that, I find the selection of curriculum, as you suggested, about the books for children, is key. Trishla's book talks of being thankful, and that becomes a part of what you're supposed to have as your ethos. And our book, the rest of that series, is again about those values. So in a curriculum, values must be incorporated. But how do you do that without really preaching? How do you select your themes, Bulbul, for your books?
Well, preaching is the word, you have to be so careful not to talk down to children. And I think all successful writers, children's writers or writers of young adult book, you have to get that balance. Even if you're doing a non-fiction book, like, I did this book about nature, birds and trees of Delhi, but I had to make it in the kind of sharing, not preaching, like I know so much and I'm going to teach you everything I know. And, but no, it has to be a sharing journey that you learn together. And it's a fine balance, and sometimes you succeed and sometimes you don't. And a child is such a good judge. He will pick up the book, he'll read the first 2 or 3 pages, he or she, and if you don't catch his imagination, he's just going to put it down. He's not going to read it because he's read a great review in Times of India, or he's seen you talking somewhere. He will only read the book if he likes it. That's it.
True. So I have another question here from Swati, who's Tarini's mum, and she says, should we tell stories in Hindi or English? Because when I speak in English, my daughter understands, but little. If I narrate the story with actions and expressions, then she does understand nicely. But if the speaker can tell more elaborately, the speakers, Bulbul and Vinita, about how to start narrating the story and get comfortable with English, this will help.
Shall I answer that? I think
yes,
it depends on
both,
how,
I think
don't know,
it would be nice.
Child is obviously quite young. So it's a mixture of Hindi and English, or their mother tongue and English, to mix it up together. And actions, young children love that. You have to be an actor, you have to be a clown, you have to be everything together to again catch their attention.
And your books have been translated into Finnish, Italian, French, Swedish. So does it really
Chinese?
Not to forget.
Not to forget.
Yes. I think in COVIDian times, forget.
Yeah.
Things, I feel sorry for them.
Each accolade is well earned and with a lot of effort. But the question that I have to ask is that then does it matter what the language is? English, Hindi, French, Spanish, Chinese, whatever.
You want Bulbul to answer that, or do you want me to take it up?
Yeah. Well, no, it doesn't matter. Like I said, your mother tongue, if your child obviously learns, if he's he's Bengali, he'll speak a little bit of Bengali and English, or no English, just Bengali. I mean, whatever, the words don't matter. It's just communicating with the child that's important.
I agree with that. And I think that what's most important is being able to connect with your child and being able to express yourself very well. That's very important. So the language that you're most comfortable in, that's the language that you should tell the child the story in, and the language that the child can most understand. And if you really want to improve his or her English, there are other ways of doing that. Once you've connected with the child, there are ways of making him or her read books in that language.
Well, I think when it comes to language, it's really not a choice, because you think that you are being able to direct what your child speaks or knows better. Mm-hmm. So you think, like, for example, when my daughter was born, my older one, I only spoke to her in Hindi, because I used to host a breakfast show on television, and it felt so good to have people speak Hindi in a beautiful way, because by and large, the way we speak Hindi amongst our peers is very basic. And to actually have a little bit of deeper understanding of the language, it is so beautiful. So the first 3 years, all my communication was only in Hindi. But then eventually, when she grew up, because the whole household was talking in English all the time, Hindi flew out of the window. So it's really not a choice about what you decide you're going to do for the child. What do you have to say about that? How much of it is your environment and how much of it is the direction that is given?
I really worry very often when I hear people speaking in beautiful Hindi and writing in beautiful Hindi. I worry about the fact about the next generation. And I'm not very sure how many will be able to speak or write so well in Hindi. And I'm not talking about spoken Hindi. A lot of us talk in spoken Hindi all the time, so that's okay. I'm not even talking about the very difficult Hindi that most poets or orators like to use. That's scary. But, good readable Hindi, like you talk about English, that write in simple, good English. Similarly, writing in simple, good Hindi, we don't seem to be encouraging that much at all.
Yeah. Yeah, if I may, add to that, because that's what, if you look at the textbooks, Hindi textbooks in schools, it's impossible. I mean, there's so much beautiful literature in Hindi, which is lyrical, which is easy, appeals easily to everybody. They don't include that. They include very
The very
heavy
difficult one,
text.
yes.
Yes,
I
I mean
believe
it's
that's not so with regional languages. I find that there are in regional languages, if you really like, the South Indian languages, the Bengali and other Indian languages, I feel probably people are much more proud to be reading and writing in their language
Mhm.
than in Hindi.
Yeah.
well. Then, what do you feel about reading a normal work versus an ebook? Here's a question that's just come online.
I think they're both great. E-book is very good way to get a child who hates reading. A lot of children who are so focused on their iPads and things, and get them to read a book is difficult. So get them to read on an e-book.
Vinita,
Yeah.
you mentioned that you still prefer your physical books.
I do, but
So,
when I'm yes at home, when I'm at home, then I do. But when I'm traveling, I carry my Kindle all over. It's so much easier. Earlier, I used to have like so many books to carry with me when I was traveling, and now there's just one Kindle and all your books are in that. And once you're reading, you really forget what it is because you're so lost in the story. You forget whether you're holding a physical book or you're holding your Kindle and reading it.
the medium doesn't matter.
Yes.
Well, Ramandeep is asking a question, which is her 3-year-old daughter loves books, and they introduced both English and Hindi language to her through books. Nowadays, she wants her to translate to her all English stories into Hindi.
Wow.
Yes, Hindi is more common in her joint family, but she'd like her to be comfortable in both languages equally. So, what should she do?
Well, read in both languages. Read. That's simple, and they're wonderful books. Like I said earlier, and some of them are, I think, I'm not sure the name of the publisher. They do bilingual books. The story the same. I think Pratham does them, where you can read both the text, the same story.
Well, I'm going to take you through
I
one
think,
of the.
sorry, one suggestion I would have for her is if the child reads a book in Hindi, the mother can ask the child to write out a short précis, of a compact little passage about the book in English, and if the book is in English, can write it out in Hindi after that. That might encourage it.
Yes, well, I would suggest, Ramandeep, that there is one other way to do it also. To say, abhi the characters in the book, ये इस जगह में हैं और हिंदी में बोल रहे हैं, and then you can transport them to another country, and you can actually then do the same book in that country's language, and maybe you can even make an imaginary country where you have no language and you can just do it with expressions. So that way your child will be open to taking in many different layers. In fact, when we read a story at the school, we talk about it in different contexts. So the same story might carry on for a whole week. We will talk about the geographical location, the climatic conditions, the characters, the illustrations, the colors, the shapes, the relativity of big and small versus, triangle and square or oval. So there are so many ways to bring a book alive. And at that stage, when they start out, if that imagination is unleashed, because a book in front of you really is like a puzzle. You put it together and you keep adding images. When you write Bulbul, are you doing that consciously? It's
Uh,
like when you do a course on writing, they say you should be able to smell, touch, feel. So when you write, like I know Arundhati Roy's first line was red bananas ripen. I cannot forget that because it was so many flavors put in 3 words of the opening.
Well, right, when I'm teaching creative writing to children or to young adults, that's what, you keep asking yourself questions. You have to ask yourself each time, each sort of phase of the book, the beginning, why is it happening? Where is it happening? When is it happening? And you can keep changing as you go along. You can keep change. You can take a story, you can pull it apart, you can put it together again. And that's a great exercise to do with children. Give them a familiar story and form groups, like you form groups with your Ramayan group, and get them to come back with a totally new story. And so that way you can, it's very vivid. The imagination of all this pooled imagination is wonderful.
And for you, Vanita, how much of your writing is experiential and how much of it is imagination?
Uh, My writing is not really fiction, since I'm writing my columns, which are non-fiction. So I don't think it can be imagination really, because I write about contemporary issues and relationships. Um, uh, a lot of it is experiential in the sense that all of them may not be my own experiences, but they are the experiences of people who've spoken to me. It could be, I could be picking up topics from something that I've read somewhere, or a movie that I've watched, or people that I've overheard sitting in a restaurant, listening in on other people's conversations, or just anywhere really, talking to friends like you. So anything could inspire a column. But I do feel one thing, and that is something that has surprised me over the years. Initially, I wouldn't even talk about it, but now I've spoken to so many authors who all say the same, that you sit down to write and you keep thinking, okay, how am I going to put this, what am I going to do? And then there is that moment, that one moment, when you really, it's like, just stepping over the precipice and getting deep diving into it, and something seems to take over, and then you start writing, and when you finished writing, you come out of it almost as if you've come out of a trance. And then there's that feeling, oh, did I write this, or did somebody else write it for me? I
Wow.
used to feel very odd about it, but I've heard a lot of authors talk about this
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Like it's something else that takes over, inspiration or whatever you call it,
It
and
comes
then
comes
it's like you're in a trance.
yeah,
Yes, I'm
yeah,
sure Bulbul, in your paintings and your writings,
yeah,
you've
yeah.
felt that as well.
Yeah. Well, in writing, it does. You set out a pattern. You say, "This is how I'm going to write. This is what," and in the middle of it, it takes on its own journey,
Yes,
and it
it,
comes.
yeah,
Like I said, it's a gift from the gods. It just
yes,
comes somewhere, and then you look at it, and it's like
yeah,
coming out of meditation, deep
yes,
meditation.
So it's
exactly.
just like meditation. Everyone
Yes,
can meditate, so
yeah,
everyone can write. But
can
that
write.
moment to begin reading, as in suddenly you become that passionate about a particular book or
Yes.
something, is that also that one moment, or is it something that you
Uh,
grow into?
no, I think that is something like more an accumulation of such moments. I find the same moment that I find after I've written something that I feel is really good. There's that, that feeling of joy, that, oh wow, I wrote this. Similarly, when you read some book where there's some really good writing, I feel the same joy. Like I'll pause in the middle of it and say, wow, what did the writer just
Yeah,
say?
right.
What a beautiful
Yeah,
phrase.
yeah,
And it's like you're high suddenly, you're high on that phrase. You have to stop reading at that point, because you want to internalize it, you want to enjoy the moment.
yeah.
When you've experienced some such moments in reading, then you go back to it again and again, like a nasha. Then
I
you go
think
back
you've
to it.
just unraveled that
Yeah,
one
yeah,
mystery.
Hmm.
When people
mystery.
talk about, there's entertainment, reading is entertainment, and there's entertainment on a screen, what is the difference? The difference is the speed at which you are intaking, because you
Yes,
can really then incorporate it into your being, as opposed to
absolutely.
something going by so fast that before you
Yes.
can blink, it's over.
Yeah.
But having
Also
said that,
the imagination, Shivani.
Mm.
Like, you can let your imagination loose. Where you stop, then you start imagining. In a movie, you don't get the time to do that.
Yeah.
So you start thinking, what will happen next? Could it be this? Could it be that? In a movie, it's
Mm.
happening there, right?
yes.
Yeah, it's easier for you. Something on the screen is all there for you. In
Yes.
a book, you have to work
You have
to
to work. It's more
achieve that
interactive.
wonderful. Yeah,
Yes. Yes,
to that
true.
magical moment you have to work.
Mm.
It's liposuction versus working out.
That's right.
And the effects of the working out is permanent,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah, it has so many hidden
yeah,
benefits because every part of your body benefits from that, so every part of your
right.
being
Yeah,
benefits from that reading experience.
yeah.
There's a teacher, Vandana, who's asking, should one read abridged versions or classics, or the complete
Yeah,
versions of
the original
classics?
classical.
Hmm.
Original, yeah.
I would say definitely read the abridged versions, because you are not going to have the patience to read the classics. I think the classics, original classics, are read when we are studying English literature, when we're doing our post graduation in English literature. That's the time you read them. If you have the patience and if you can, then definitely read them, but don't force your child to try to read an original classic. It's better that the child knows the story, knows the characters, and is able to talk about them and talk about the story and internalize the learnings from that story, rather than forcing him or her to read the original.
Mm. I think you begin with the abridged version, and you'll enjoy it, especially if it's a classic. You'll definitely more. I think 8 out of 10 children will go on to reading the
Yeah,
original,
yeah,
the
at least some of them
unabridged.
will.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yes.
going to take you closer to a painting that I have here. Oops. Okay, that one. It's Draupadi, modern Draupadi and Draupadi of the olden times. And when I was doing my play on Draupadi, I found that, I was very keen to read the original version. And it was kind of scary. That's when authors like Bulbul Sharma, who've done the abridged version of the Ramayana, came as God sent. And then one could really research. I went to some people who were experts on the text, and then they could take me through the original version for the parts that I needed to. But it can be very daunting to have a text that you just get scared opening the page. So the most effective and essential thing is, I would say, for your children, go a peg down, go a peg simpler, so that they are independently able to handle that book. uh, I mean, if it's something that is going to scare them, then it becomes that much more delayed. I also want to ask you, other than there's a question to say which were your favorite books, also that moment of when you became a reader. Do you need a book club, so to say, like that gang of cousins which you used to have, or that that a lot of friends who thought it was cool to read? Because today the peer pressure is, it could be cooler to know the latest stuff that's happening on your Netflix, and with the video games and the TikToks. So how important is that peer group that thinks it's cool to read?
I think it's very important. It's very important because otherwise the child feels a little isolated. I've seen children, single only one child who's reading, and the other people think he or she is a bit of a nerd. Oh, he's reading. So if you have two or three other friends, you can talk, you can discuss a book. It makes you feel happier. Children at that age all want to do, want to belong.
So
So
what should
it's
parents
good.
do to create those kind of ecosystems for children to be able to want to read?
I think the child can do it. They can just get, if they're fond of reading, they'll definitely find other children who are interested in reading.
Vinita, your favorite book
You mean ever or as a child?
as a child?
As a child, it was, there was a compendium brought out by Reader's Digest called The World's Best Fairy Tales. And I loved that. I used to keep reading, rereading, and rereading those, and I still have that book with me. I still have it with me. My children read it, and I still have it with me. So that used to be my eternal favorite, always, as a kid. Yeah.
Bulbul, your favorite?
Mine was a Bengali book. It's a book of nonsense poetry. It's called Abul Tabul, which my mother used to read it. I couldn't read Bengali, so she read it out. In fact, I'm reading it right now. During the lockdown, I discovered an old copy in this house, so I'm reading that. But otherwise, it's Alice in Wonderland. When I was a child, I still
Yeah.
read it all the time.
The horrors of children's books, Hansel and Gretel being abandoned by the parents, the breadcrumbs being eaten by the birds, the path home never being found. How okay is it to have those kind of scares for children in their growing years?
Well, that's really cool because nowadays parents are very particular. Everything is quite sanitized. I don't know if you read this book which came out about a couple of years ago. It's called Politically Correct Bedtime Stories, where everything is sanitized. You know, the wolf is a good guy, and everybody is good in that, and nobody gets hurt. There's no. But children, you know, if you read classic fairy tales, or you read even in our regional literature, they are so scary and they're quite frightening. You know, how people are constantly being, head is chopped off, arms are chopped off. But children deal with that. I mean, look at this dystopian literature that they read now. It's, you know, the movies. Even Harry Potter is pretty frightening if you know, look at it.
In fact, one of the books which we talked about when we had this election, Bulbul, if you remember, was that book Darkness, where the visuals were just stunning.
Right. Yeah.
But it was kind of haunting and worrying because it was a parent who is unwell and has cancer, and the child is waiting and saying life is dark without that parent. And I was actually worried. I said, this is, you know, such a difficult read. If you can have a difficult read at that level. But I do agree that it is, I think books and pets are preparations for life. And they teach you skills that you might not have developed otherwise if it weren't for them. Going back to questions, because we hardly have any time left. Ramayan is on TV these days. How to read mythology to children? Okay. That's a question we can come back to. There's another question which during the course of the next few minutes, we have about 7 minutes left. If you had to recommend 30 books for the age group of 7 to 9, what books would you recommend? I won't say do 30, but just keep that in your conversation and keep giving them some. And how to inculcate reading habit in a kid who is hyperactive by nature. This is from Shraddha, Shambhavi's mom.
Yeah, may I answer that?
Yes.
I think picture books. How old is the child? Did she
She's
say
3.
She's 3. Yeah, picture books. You know, every child, you know, when I've worked with autistic children, worked with other children who have this, you know, attention deficit, and picture books. You hold up a nice, beautiful picture book and you look into them, and every child will stop, at least for a little while. Yeah, but you have to, like, Shravani, you have to act it out. You have to read it well. You have to modulate your voice. It's tough, but you can do it.
But what for parents who are not comfortable with that? What tools can they have to become comfortable? Because, you know, for Vinita, she is always on a platform. She's used to projecting. For you, you're also projecting in your writing, in your painting. But some people may not be so comfortable to go out there and shed all inhibitions and act out a book to their child. So what's that tool for them?
They have to learn. It's too bad, you know, they have to learn. And the child helps, you know, because if you see a child telling a story, they are so, you know, they're sort of so animated, and you can't just pick up a book and, you know, read to them. And they'll lose interest, they'll go away, they'll tear the book, they'll do something. But you have to engage the child. And
you know, one thing that I feel really helped with my children, that I would always catch them just before they went to sleep. And just before they go to sleep, the defenses are down, and whoever's hyperactive is not hyperactive. So whatever I had to tell them, whatever I had to get out of them also, you know, any confessions during the day of stuff they want to talk about but are keeping away, that's the time it would all come out. And after that, I would tell them a story. And I would start a story like, okay, the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. I just started off the story, took it to a certain point, and then told them, okay, the rest of it tomorrow night, then the next night, and then the next night. So at that time, the kids are easier to catch and have an impact on.
Yes. And another thing, sorry, is that you, to engage a child's attention, I would put the child's name in the story. You know, at that age, 3 to 5, 6, a child is so self-absorbed in its own world. So you say, like, you know, you did this, and put some of his familiar, you know, pets or parents, and they love that, because they then become the center of the story. And it's much easier to get into their minds then.
Yes, and I think another thing that works well is props. For example, you have books that have sound effects, but you can actually create the sound effects. Like if you keep a bell for a bell, or a, you know, whatever. Even to make imaginary props,
you can have. You know, she can use puppets. If she wants.
Yes. Even a glass can be a well.
Oh,
Mm.
you guys, both of you are sounding like so interesting. I wish I was a child again and my mom was listening to this.
Well,
Yeah, great
um,
ideas.
your suggestions, the 30 divided by how many?
Yeah.
Just a few
Oh
basic
God.
suggestions of books that children must read during the course of 2 to 10.
2 to 10. Oh,
I
two
go
is
back to 2 is too small, but that could be, well,
picture
I'll say
books.
picture books, yes.
Yeah,
For
Hungry
my children,
Caterpillar. Yeah, the Hungry Caterpillar
yes,
is a
yes.
lovely book. I'd
Hmm.
suggest that. And 10, the Harry Potter series are wonderful. They are really good. The books. I didn't like
Yes,
the movies, but the books are a great one for 10-year-old. And the classics, the abridged classics, David Copperfield and things like that. I think they're great. But of course, there are all the new books that the children are reading, Percy Jackson, because that has so much Greek history. You learn so much about Greek mythology and Indian writers, so many Indian writers, Paravan, and the book that we gave an award to, Vinita, Bhura,
yes, the
Cloud,
cloud called
Cloud,
Bhura.
yeah,
Yes.
so there are so many books nowadays.
Yes.
And newspapers are doing a great job. They give a list all the time, what books are coming out, what to read.
Yeah, the internet is actually full of them. If you just put that your question in there, Shivani, I'm sure you'll get the answer to that. But since you want it from us, Bulbul, that's not 30 though.
No,
No, we
I
can't
left
do,
the rest to
we
you.
can't
I
do
left the
You
30.
can't
rest to
do
you.
30.
I can't
So
do 30. I
going
love to
back,
get my wrist out.
yeah, there are some interestingly books that we used to read in our childhood and that have still lasted. I still hear people talking about reading Enid Blyton, though not as much as earlier, but I do hear them talk about reading Enid Blyton. And uh, I hear a lot of people talk reading Roald Dahl,
Yeah,
Matilda, and
yeah,
the
yeah,
Chocolate Factory, and whatever.
yeah,
Uh,
Charlie and the
yeah,
Chocolate
Charlie
Factory.
and the Chocolate Factory, and
yeah.
Harry Potter, of course, like Bulbul said. Then Rusk and Bond is evergreen. Sudha
Mm.
Murthy has a lot of books. Bulbul Sharma's books, and then there are other writers like there's Vinita Coelho
Yes.
and many other writers who are writing, Indian writers who are writing beautiful books
Yeah.
for children. Devdutt Patnaik has brought out a series of very nice mythological books for children. So I think all these can be read.
You know, you
And
said the
many more.
internet, and I think the internet is an excellent example because what happens is people talk about in this younger generation that we don't need to know because when we want to know, we can get that information.
Mm.
But I would just say, as we come to a close of this session, that it's the difference between having RAM or hard drive. Who the hell likes to plug in a hard drive? You know, you want RAM. So it's
Yeah.
really worth it to go out there and actually know where Peru is rather than think you'll Google it and
Mm.
actually have that kind of bandwidth of having read stuff
Mm.
because it comes back to you. It's like a perfume which keeps making your life fragrant forever because those memories, those lines, those thoughts, they are your personal interpretations, which are so, so precious. Any parting words that you'd like to share, Bulbul?
Mm. Well, I would just say that to all the children here, more than the parents, that if you read, you'll never be lonely. You'll never be bored, and you'll go to so many places which with the writer, which you probably won't be able to do later on. So just keep reading and stay safe.
Yes.
And for you,
Yeah.
Vinita?
I would say that I believe there is no life without reading and writing. Both are equally important. And you spoke about Write India, the project that we have in Times of India. We also have a junior Write India, where we encourage children. And Bulbul has been one of the judges for one of our junior contests, where we encourage children to write. So I would encourage parents to get their children onto such platforms, not just Write India. I'm sure there are many others where they participate in poetry writing, short story writing, essay writing, and they will find like minded peers there if they are really looking for someone. And it will always encourage the habit of reading and writing, which is a lifelong companion. And this is one
Mm.
companion where you don't have to worry about infidelity. You can have as many loves as you like.
You know, that is so true. Bulbul, before we part, I would like you to say something about, there was that question about reading mythology to your children. Is there a particular way to do it?
Uh, I don't know. It depends on the age group. There's, like fortunately now there's so many books on mythology. So depending on the age group, a very small child, then of course picture books, like I said before, and his older children, and then it could be a sharing, like you said, your husband, he reads poetry. So it could be a sharing thing with the parents, the grandparents, the children all sitting together. And most children by the age of 8 or 9 know all the familiar stories in any case. So it could be a kind of a sharing. And before I go, may I show you the mountains?
Yes.
Please.
Okay, people. So that's another story right there. Reading is not just about books. It's about reading landscapes, reading nature, and reading each other, most importantly. If reading gives you the sensitivity, Bulbul, thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank
It
you.
was stunning.
Thank you. It was
But I'm
very
saying if reading gives you the sensitivity to appreciate the other person's point of view, to be empathetic, to have commonalities with your family members who you may just take for granted otherwise, then this is definitely the path. There is no question to read, or what was the
Or
option?
not to.
Was that an option?
to
I
read, to
forgot.
read.
To read, to
Or
read,
to
to read.
read.
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to share with you that next time we're talking about safety of children, we have Dr. Samir Parekh, who's a brilliant, brilliant person who very easily directs young minds in a path that lets them not be lonely. You said books don't let us be lonely, Vinita and Bulbul. That's true. But sometimes children are isolated. These are hard times. You've been born into times of internet and connectivity, which actually disconnects in a way sometimes. So whether it's through books or through talks, we need to look at, are our children safe because we provided them the safe environment? Are they safer as in compared to others around them? Are they protected from peer pressure and other emotional situations? Are they the safest that they can be? Is the environment something that we're working towards? So there are many layers of safety. We'll be discussing that at our next webinar on the 30th of May at 12:30 p.m. We look forward to seeing you all. Please follow us, the Study School on Facebook, and also on the Study India on Instagram. And once again, I'd like to thank our editor of the Times of India, Vinita Dwara Nangya, and our author and wonderful artist who has painted our canvas on the show today to tell us all about the beautiful colors of being able to read, Bulbul Sharma. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Thanks. Bye.